So this is a first for the channel. I've really never done anything in terms of reaction videos and stuff, but I've seen Miniwargaming's latest How to Fix Age of Sigmar episode, and it came a little close to home, didn't it? They were talking about Warhammer Fantasy. I did watch it, and yeah, they made some good points, but there were also some problems. So I kind of want to just look over the video with you guys and put my points into perspective here. I know a lot of people might think this is me trying to shit on Miniwar, but to be honest, they are a really good company. Before anyone thinks anything else, I really enjoy their content. Specifically, I prefer their Old World Wars series, but I think people like Steve, Cullen, Luca, and the others, they're really cool guys. They show a lot of passion for the hobby, so I'm not trying to bring them down in any way. I am a genuine fan of theirs, and it was always kind of a bit of a dream of mine to actually go to the Miniwargaming studios, you know, the bunker, and play Old World Wars with them and stuff. I think it would be really cool, like being a battle report and stuff. But, you know, they stopped doing that series, so I kind of just shelved the idea. So I'm just going to put my views on anything related to Warhammer Fantasy. When they start diverting and stuff, I'll skip ahead. If by some weird reason you aren't aware of Miniwargaming, I suggest you check them out. They do amazing battle reports, lots of fun. Yeah, sometimes they get rules wrong, but hey, we're only human. They actually are just really entertaining guys, so I do suggest you check them out. But without further ado, let's just jump right in.
Hey everybody, Matthew and Steve here from Miniwargaming.com, and welcome to another discussion video. I guess by now we've been calling this series Fixing Age of Sigmar because we know all the answers.
Right, I promise I'm not going to get too petty about this, but I thought this was a what went wrong with Warhammer Fantasy video, not a Fixing Age of Sigmar video. I mean, I know it's kind of relevant, but you know, they're two different games. Let's just not spin it as the same one.
Anyways, so today we're going to talk about what killed Warhammer Fantasy. Why did it die? Now, this is a touchy subject for a lot of people because some people think that it shouldn't have died. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it in a nice way. I'm not here to bash the fact that, you know, get on with your lives and move your models from square to circular bases because they look better that way anyways.
Oh boy, when someone says they're not going to bash, you know they're going to bash.
We're not here to talk about...
I concede that fact. Things do look better around bases.
Yeah. We're not here to talk about that. You want to leave them on your square bases, you can stay back in the old days and keep them on your square bases. That's fine. I understand. Whatever. You don't like your models looking good? Whatever. It doesn't matter. We're not here to talk about that.
This is the problem. This is the problem. Is people.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I honestly, Warhammer Fantasy. I played a lot of Warhammer Fantasy in earlier editions. I stopped playing later on because I just fell out of love with the game. So I'm not here to talk about why the game wasn't good. We're here to try to talk about why the game in the end, if the game wasn't good.
Okay, let's get started with this then. So Matthew says that he played more of the earlier editions than the later ones, and to be honest, it's really hard to compare Warhammer Fantasy battles in any series. If we look at the Warhammer Fantasy Battles universe and how each edition radically changed the game, you can't really just say, yeah, I played 4th, so Warhammer Fantasy is bad because it's always been bad. It's like, no. If I remember correctly, 4th and 5th were considered Hero Hammer, 6th was the Golden Age, 7th was kinda broken, and then 8th was pretty much hordes, hordes, and hordes. Each edition was pretty much radically different in that sense, so yeah, you can't really just look back as a older edition player and go, yeah, this is wrong because of that. Because more than likely that problem wasn't there in the later edition, there was a whole mess of other problems. And yes, I can admit there were problems with Warhammer Fantasy.
And don't give me that, Warhammer Fantasy's still here. It's not, it's gone, alright? Just admit it. Now,
Interesting fact.
It's now
It's actually kind of still here.
Why is that?
There's a group of 20 guys in this area.
No. I'm not saying that there aren't players. I'm trying to say that Games Workshop really, this is Warhammer Fantasy 2.0 or something like that, or 9th edition.
Well, I mean, it kind of is. Same characters exist, same universe in a roundabout way.
Right.
I mean, I could have told you that. Like it or not, it's the same universe. It's just thousands of years in the future. Unless the lore has recently changed, as far as I knew it, after the world blew up, Sigmar kind of floated through space for a while. It's still the same universe, it's just in a different area. Then there's a bit of a timeline jump forward, because I'm assuming they didn't want to just make Sigmar magically think up the Stormcast Eternals, so they had to give them some time and so on. But yeah, it's the same universe. I'm not a fan of it, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, let's just get that out of the way. Obviously, Warhammer Fantasy is not been erased. It hasn't been retconned. It's been, what do you call that?
Well, it's been
rebooted in a sense, but not like the Star Trek way where they go through a wormhole, go back in time, and then everybody looks different for some reason and acts different for some reason. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about it actually, they decided to move it forward thousands of years they decided to destroy the old world and create the realms the way they are, which, like it or not, Warhammer Fantasy is still part of the past of Age of Sigmar. But just for the sake of argument, we're going to say Warhammer Fantasy is gone. Age of Sigmar replaced it.
Yes.
Let's just concede that fact. We're not.
That is true.
You can disagree with that. In fact, I'd love to hear your comments on all of this. But this is going to bring up some anger issues in some people that are watching this video, and I get it. I get it. You spent years of your life and tons of your money and time building an army like Tomb Kings, and then they decide that that army is no longer relevant at all.
Well, I wouldn't say Warhammer Fantasy is dead per se. Yeah, the Tabletop series has kind of died for it, but there's still books being printed or in ebook format, there's some re-releases for the books, there's an RPG series, and there's a very successful franchise for games too. Warhammer Fantasy isn't properly dead because they're still making Total War games for Warhammer, they're still making Vermintide games, and I'm pretty sure down the line there will be more Warhammer Fantasy games. I just find it a bit annoying when people say Warhammer Fantasy is dead, because it's really not, and it still carries on with the hearts of the fans. Yeah, GW doesn't really acknowledge it too much, barring the few posts on Warhammer community, especially about the games, but we know it still exists in one way, shape, or form.
You don't get to even... You can play with the Tomb Kings in a new one, but let's face it, it's not relevant anymore. That is discouraging. It's kind of like the Primaris Marines replacing the Tactical Marines. We can talk about all you want, but in the end, they replace them, and that can be discouraging and kind of angry for somebody who spent a lot of their time and money on that hobby. I get it.
Not really going to argue there, I understand where he's coming from, it's kind of annoying. I used to be a Bretonia player, so I know. But then again, GW have been doing this for pretty much years, randomly just squatting armies like the squats, just for the sake of it, I guess.
So I understand why you'd be angry if you did that. But we're here to talk about, in the end, what made Warhammer Fantasy fail, lose sales, and eventually go so badly that a company would take its first ever game and one of its core games for such a long time and essentially destroy it and start, not from scratch, but almost.
That's a funny assumption. We don't... Can you say with absolute certainty it was sales were so bad that...
Yeah.
Well,
because they're a public company, you can see their numbers.
But I
Warhammer
mean,
Fantasy sales were bad.
And why were they bad? Maybe because 8th edition, and yes, this is coming from an 8th edition fan, maybe you needed to buy so many units to actually make a basic 2,000 point list. It could also be that models haven't been updated for many, many years. I'm pretty sure they're still selling some casts which are as old or older than I am. It could also be that Games Workshop really didn't promote Warhammer Fantasy Battles pretty much at all, to be honest. Their main focus was always pretty much Space Marines as a whole, and it's still pretty much their focus now.
They made a significant change like they've never done before. 40K itself has never experienced this. They've gone through some pretty significant edition changes, and yet nothing akin to this.
I mean, if you look at 1st edition Warhammer Fantasy Battles compared to 8th edition, it's radically different. Even just looking at 1st compared to Hero Hammer or Hero Hammer compared to 6th, it's pretty much different. Warhammer Fantasy had always been radically changed every few editions. It was at the point where many just either stayed in that edition or just accepted it and moved on. I appeared during more or less 6th edition and I kind of stayed there, but I carried on and I played 7th and 8th, preferring 8th over 7th and still preferring 6th over all of them. But yeah, to say that Games Workshop have never done radical changes before, yeah, that's kind of wrong, dude. No offense, I'm not trying to bring you down here, but yeah, they have done changes like this a lot of times.
I suspect if they didn't have the 40K property, they wouldn't have made AOS. I think they probably wouldn't have canceled it and took the risk of doing another product, but they had something else that was making all their money that they could rely on. This was a gamble for them.
Right.
So without 40K, they would have kept working on Fantasy, in my opinion, and tweaked it around a bunch.
And then maybe eventually got out of business because of it.
Oh, absolutely.
What makes you think they'll go out of business? If they didn't have 40K, they'd probably be promoting Warhammer Fantasy and not ignoring it as they mostly did. Yeah, it would have been a lot different. They wouldn't be as profitable as a company, because let's face it, when you look at stuff like the Space Marines, it's very iconic nowadays, isn't it? But I don't think they would have gone out of business, and pretty much you're going into like a weird sort of theory here. We can't tell the future, but I honestly, in my opinion, don't think that they would have gone out of business. I think that Warhammer Fantasy would have been given the attention it deserves, but that's pretty much it.
But because they had their big cash cow, they had the ability to take their molds and make something else with it.
A lot of businesses have rebranded themselves before Games Workshop did. It's not uncommon, guys.
Warhammer 40k was later introduced, not that much later, and it was just basically a space version of fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, you really look at it, and that's all it is.
It still is.
Necron still is, right. And I love it. The Necrons are just Tomb Kings in space. You've got elves becoming Eldar, dwarves becoming squats, and then becoming dead. You have, they didn't have Space Marines in fantasy until Age of Sigmar, but you essentially had, and it was an empire, and now you have the Imperium. Like, you have like literally the same models from Chaos were transposable between the two universes.
The Chaos models are still transposable as far as I'm aware. Chaos Demons exist in Sigmar and they do exist in 40k. And Age of Sigmar / Warhammer 40k are still pretty much the same game if you look at it. If anything, Age of Sigmar moved fantasy more to a 40k standard. You don't need large armies anymore, you can bring them but you don't need them, and the rules have gotten a lot more simplified. Granted, this also happened to 40k when 8th edition came out, so it looks like they were just trying to simplify everything in general.
Sure. So, let's go back.
Okay.
About 3 years ago now? 4 years ago? I don't remember.
I think about 4.
When Age of Sigmar was birthed, when the end times happened for Warhammer Fantasy, and then they launched Age of Sigmar. We're not going to discuss whether Age of Sigmar was a good game at first, because it wasn't.
It wasn't.
But the question is, why did they have to get rid of Warhammer Fantasy? So I have a few reasons. I want to hear your idea first, Steve. Give me one
there's something
of the reasons that you think that they had to eventually reboot it, cancel it.
I think there are 2 main reasons, but there's a bunch of there's something that I'll explain to you. I'm not sure you're aware of. So the 2 main reasons I think are Warhammer Fantasy is so complicated that even right now, fantasy videos will go up or whatever. People will comment you're doing X wrong, and they're wrong. People think they don't play fantasy.
Alright, yeah, here we go. So there was an issue with the rulebook being massive, but that was because the rulebook had a lot of fluff, a lot of scenarios, and just general other details. However, there was a smaller version of the rulebook that you could get, and it basically just had the rules. Now, in regards to Miniwargaming getting comments saying that you've done this wrong, you've done this wrong, you've done this wrong. First off, yes, it's a 500-page rulebook. People get stuff wrong. I get stuff wrong. I know people who've played since 1st edition that still get stuff wrong. It happens. But you're one to talk, mate. Because, let's face it, you get a lot of stuff wrong too. Didn't you admit that you took 2 consecutive turns once? You can't just go, people think they know how to play Warhammer Fantasy, they're just voicing their opinions. In different languages, it can also be read in different ways and so on. That's why a lot of tournaments will mainly go for an English setting when they're playing with different countries. And it's not just your fantasy videos which people point out that you guys got the rules mistaken. It's pretty much every type of game you guys play. Don't get me wrong, I watch you guys because you're entertaining, you're awesome people, I absolutely love your content, but you're not perfect. Neither am I. That's a very important thing I need to state there. Neither am I.
The rule book you had to check 3 different chapters for one thing. It was so convoluted, it was so poorly written, and so thick with rules that people thought, even I thought, when I started doing bat reps, I thought I didn't play Warhammer Fantasy. And all the comments are coming in and doing this wrong, doing this wrong. I had to look at it, oh, you're wrong, oh, you're right, no, you're wrong, you're right, back and forth. It was poorly written rules. Like the errata.
Was it poorly written,
yes,
or was it complicated?
Both.
Because those are 2 different
Both.
things.
The errata for 8th edition was this thick.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
If you can't see his fingers, that's like a good 3/4 of an inch.
The errata was almost as
Or like
thick as
almost
the
2
rules
centimeters.
section in that big tome. Okay. The errata and explanations.
Similar to the errata for 40k 7th edition, where it was like we came up with 20 or 30 pages of
Well,
FAQs.
that's funny. So back in Warhammer 40k 7th edition, I can't remember who did it, but somebody took all the rules you need, with the exception of the special abilities, and put it all in a 7-page pamphlet.
Right.
Everything for 7th edition Warhammer 40k. And that game was pretty. Ugh.
It's not just fantasy, as you can see, it's 40k too. Pretty much anything GW had their IP on, if they worked on it enough, they would complicate it. So let's just not say it's just all fantasy, because 7th edition 40k had some problems. Some updates to Mordheim and Necromunda had problems. It's just pretty much a generalized Games Workshop thing, pretty much, because at the end of the day, that's what they do best. They like to overcomplicate things.
But yeah, so the rules were bad. They were bad. I mean, they were great once you
say they're
learn
bad,
them.
but you love that game.
No,
So
that's what I'm saying.
aren't bad.
The rules were great. The rules layout and learning, they had a steep learning curve. And then the amount of models you needed got out of control. Like, I painted more high elves since I started working for Miniwargaming than beforehand, and like that used to be a massive army. Like you needed more and more. Like 20-man blobs weren't good enough more. You need 40 or 50. You needed more war machines. You didn't bring monsters. Got left behind. Monsters were no longer usable. So all those really cool things that I'm talking from a power level. I can point that out. Like you can use if you want. But like those really cool centerpieces of your army, you weren't in your army because you couldn't really bring a character on a dragon. It's gonna get shot by a cannon and just dead. So it killed the really cool stuff. The army started looking, what's the word I'm looking for? Just, it was always the same. Here's my big horde and my support pieces. And if I have enough points, a couple of other, random things. So the armies stopped looking cool.
Yeah, there was a bit of an issue with 8th edition where hordes kinda outweighed everyone else. You couldn't really bring too many specialized armies and so on. But you're kinda wrong with the idea that people didn't bring monsters and so on. Honestly, I've seen quite a few monsters being played recently. And the community down here where I'm from pretty much uses different armies. Let's say, for example, it's August right now as the time of releasing this video. I think there've been over about maybe close to 150, 180 matches. I've seen monsters. I fielded monsters. It's not like they're always going to be targeted. It really depends on what you're bringing. Hell, this high elf player I know is actually working on some phoenixes right now because he wants to bring them for fun. It's not about competitiveness, it's just generally fun. But I do agree there is a thing with hordes for 8th edition. It was pretty much just bring as many as possible and get steadfast. It did kind of help out. I can't really comment too much. I was already a horde faction. I played Skaven, so hey, I needed 150 models per army anyway. But that thing about not seeing monsters and stuff like that is wrong. I've seen dragons, I've seen manticores, people bring it for different reasons. We have a chaos player who brings a chaos sorcerer on a manticore just to bring him in as close as possible and then just cast Purple Sun. It's very normal.
Like if you didn't learn all the nuances of movement, it took you a lot of trial and error. It was probably unfun for a lot of people at the beginning, I'm sure. Because I taught Cullen probably didn't have fun at the beginning, then it's hard to say because he loves the game now.
Right. Well, there's a lot of games with steep learning curves that are wonderful games.
So you won't have fun until you learn the rules of the game. Interesting. Well, yeah, that's kind of how it works. If you're playing the game wrongly, you're not really going to have that much fun, are you? You've got to learn the rules and actually get used to it.
But I think your point, though, is good, because if there's a steep learning curve, then you're kind of keeping out new players.
Yeah. You had a big financial investment to get in, and then you got to hope that you get annoyed and walk away from the game with your steep learning curve.
Fair, but it sounds like you're kind of talking more about 2,000 point games. You can easily squeeze out 1,000 points from a battalion box and just get a few starter games with that. The battalion boxes weren't that expensive compared to a lot of armies. If you needed a 2,000 point list, yes, but for a basic starter, you could pretty much just go with that and just go from there. At least that's what I did. I kind of just built up a force with the battalion box and just started increasing and buying new models and testing out new stuff as I went on.
Written because, maybe they'll think, no, we tried our hardest to write as well as we could, but there's just a lot to moving with movement trays and stuff. But they can definitely, I would think they would definitely agree at a higher level that there was too many rules, because what was one of the big selling points of Age of Sigmar? 4 pages of rules, right? Whether that was a good thing or not, it wasn't.
That's what they banked on.
That's what they pushed. They talked about it so much. There's only 4 pages of rules. You can play the entire game in only 4 pages of rules, which wasn't the case. That's what they said. And then they needed another 20 pages of errata. And then all the rules were really on the war scrolls now. And now they no longer try to even tell you it's only 4 pages. Yeah. But that was their thing. So I think they agree there that they must, because they really pushed the brand change from this thick book to a pamphlet of rules. Whether it was a good thing or a bad thing doesn't matter. It's the fact that they were willing to do that. So point number 1, yeah, I think that the rules were too complicated.
You guys just kind of answered your own thing there. They said Age of Sigmar 1st edition said, oh yeah, it's only 4 rule pages, and then we saw how horrible that was, didn't we? Sometimes a game like this, especially a tabletop game, needs rules. I'm not saying I don't like Age of Sigmar's less rules. I think 2nd edition is much better than 1st, and I think every Age of Sigmar player who's played both 1st and 2nd edition can admit that 2nd is far superior. It's got a few more rules, well, a lot more rules as far as I'm aware, but it actually plays better.
Well, we can talk about balance and stuff. Like, I didn't like watching certain spells and stuff, but we come to Age of Sigmar, there's plenty of balance issues too.
As long as GW owns any type of tabletop game, there will always be balance issues. Relic of Lost Cadia, anyone for the 40k fans? And yeah, Magic for Warhammer Fantasy. I'm not sure what the issue is for Age of Sigmar because I've not played it as much, but I'm sure there's some issues there too.
It was almost taboo to bring a named character. They were cool to buy and bring every now and then, but like you got your opponent's permission. That was actually difficult for me, a difficult thing for me when I moved to 40k. I'm like, people were always bringing these named characters. I'm like, that's my whatever, just go ahead and do it. I don't care.
Well, yeah, they're not as good. In 40K
Yeah,
compared to
in
Fantasy.
40k it was like I didn't realize it was just so accepted, whereas Fantasy was completely different. Like they were powerful, right? Which could really.
Named characters were a big issue when it came to Warhammer Fantasy, but you rarely saw named characters because, let's face it, they were very, very expensive. They were horrendously overpowered, yes, and some of them had amazing abilities, but they were expensive. You probably might only see them in games of 3,000 points upwards because, yeah, it just wasn't worth bringing a 600 point lord for something that just wasn't worth it. You kinda had to work around your troops and so on, and sometimes you had the weirdest loadouts. 3,000 point games, yeah. 2,000 and below, probably not unless they were cheap lords like a Lith and Nar, Quick Head Taker, and maybe just a few others.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay out of how much I like the game because I enjoyed the game, but I had bought a Tomb King's army, and turns out that's a hard army to master in the older editions and the newer editions. And then it turned out that the local meta, the people that would come in and play me, a lot of it was high elves that had really good magic, and a lot of that magic killed you, like the Purple Sun, for example.
Purple Sun's gonna
It's
kill
like
Tomb
initiative
Kings.
test or you die. Well, Tomb Kings are initiative 2 across the board. I'm like, cool, look at all these cool new chariots I finally have. They're all dead. Okay, that wasn't fun. And and the Tomb Kings need magic just to do what everybody else does normally. Oh, but I'm high elf, so I'm just going to dispel all your magic. And so you're just like, so my experience there. So I want to divorce myself from that because I know that if I had played a more competitive army, I could have had a different experience. I'm more looking at objectively why fantasy was removed, and I think that.
Fair point, but you picked an army that you really didn't understand. I did my research when I picked the Skaven and I was 12. I was looking at it, I was like, well, which one is the coolest one for me? Why do I like this army and so on? I had loads of choices of armies and I wanted to make the right one for myself. If a 12-year-old could do it, I mean, couldn't you? It's not that hard of a decision, just sit down and just look through it. Normally in that case I'd buy the rule book and I'd read the little bits of fluff and so on and just went from that. It also did help to have a nice friendly Games Workshop store about 2 hours away driving who kinda helped me pick an army. Because in all fairness, I was still a little confused when I went to the store and he sat me down and he said, well, what do you like? Do you like magic? Do you like hordes? Blah, blah, blah. And it went through that. I ended up picking the Skaven because I like magic and I like hordes.
The third one was, now this one I have trouble, I can't stand behind this as much as the other two, but what I saw, and my understanding was the fantasy players were far more competitive than the 40k ones. They were all about tournament comp, tournament lists. This is how you make your list. This is what you don't bring. You don't use the rules or the rule book where it's 2,000 points and whatever. Like you have to bring only so many war machines or whatever. That was now again, I can't stand that completely. I can't say that was everywhere, but I know that was a big thing in fantasy.
That wholly depends on who you're playing against. I'm sorry, you can't just say that is an issue and then double back at the end. When I actually took a break from Warhammer Fantasy, I decided to go to 40k, and I was met against absolute tournament lists. I actually went to the local community and I asked them, can you please help me to learn this game and so on. I'd like to learn. Warhammer Fantasy is something I love, but I want a little bit of a break. Next thing I know, I'm facing up against Baneblades when I've got a little basic gun line of Tau, and just, it was insane. I honestly just had no fun with it, which actually made me leave the community here and go into the community in Spain next door. They were much more friendlier and approachable. So it's not that the fantasy players do it because the 40k guys do it, the Necromunda guys do it, everyone does it, especially for these games where a lot of tournaments happen, people just get competitive.
My point number 4 would be that the game was too terrain light.
Yes.
And
well, all games were back then.
Yeah, even 40k. People would get mad at me all the time for setting up too much terrain. Now I don't hear that complaint anymore because they enjoy the nice, dense, cool-looking tables. But fantasy, you've put more than a couple little things on the table, and all of a sudden it wasn't just like a stop complaining and play the game anyways. It really did make the game almost impossible. You couldn't fit unless you then reposition all your guys and that. Oh, now I got to take them out of the movement trays.
One rock right here at the table, you see where my hand is, right there. You can totally dictate the game with that rock.
Right.
Yes, it's a tabletop game that requires strategy, which, you know, is important in a tabletop game. Yeah, the terrain could be a bit of an issue, but you worked around it. The normal limit was in the rulebook, which was d6 plus 4. It really isn't that much on a 6x4 table. But yeah, it could be an issue. You'd just move around, you'd work yourself. As you deploy, your terrain is already placed, and then you can start making plans for what you're going to do.
I would say point number 5, and this might go back into point number 1, it would be like a point 1b, because you're talking about the complication of the rules, would be movement trays and square bases.
I love those.
Yes, and why do you love them?
Okay.
Just simply, what's the simple answer? Why do you love
Well,
movement
okay, I
trays?
like the idea of regimental warfare, people marching, whatever, but in the movement trade, I was able to move them easier.
Right.
But then
you can move them faster.
But then
right?
those 50 models are just one model.
Right. And so that I remember watching when I played 40K in Fantasy, and even afterwards, you put 50 models in or 25 models into the tray, it takes up this much space. You take those same 25 models and play them in 40K, they take up this much space, which looks so much better. Second to that is that once again,
I don't know
we
if I
come
agree
back.
with that one, but that was debatable. Like, to you look better, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you have to spend all this time and money just to make something this big.
I know, but see, even in AOS, for the longest time at the beginning, when I played my elves were still on square bases, I would march them on the movement tray. It looked really cool. And then they would charge and scatter.
Right.
But that was cool to me. What was cool to me is that was cool.
That's
somebody,
fair.
somebody may
But
have been super...
you still have to movement tray.
Well, you have to be able to get your tax in, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? You realize that that's going to negate your effectiveness.
The thing about movement trays is a matter of opinion, isn't it? I myself quite like it. I'm a big fan of regimental armies, as Steve said. It just looks nicer to me. I just don't see it as one model, I see it as an army marching. I don't know about you guys, but I've always preferred a regimental army type of look rather than the skirmish-based system of 40k or Age of Sigmar. Nothing against you guys, but I just like a regiment style.
But I still think, and once again, arguable, but not really, square bases don't look as nice as circular bases.
On their own.
On their own.
I give you're right. Round bases look better on their own.
And some people, that's more subjective, so that point could be stricken from our list of reasons. But in the end, it can be subjective. But if the majority of people agree, then that is I don't think that they canceled Warhammer Fantasy because they're on square bases. I think that is a contributing factor to it, because not that they're on square bases, but the fact that they're in movement trays. Because that, to me, ruined the aesthetic of the game. And if Games Workshop has really shown one thing that they're about, is that they're more about the aesthetic than they are about the game.
So a regimental army isn't aesthetically pleasing. Who are you to decide what is and what isn't aesthetically pleasing? You might not enjoy it, but other people certainly do. I do. I have loads of movement trays done just for that. And yeah, they're going to cover this in just a bit, but let's just cover it now. They have movement trays for 40k and Age of Sigmar now, so are you just not going to use them ever? Because let's be fair, they actually do help.
And so that, looking back at that, it's like whenever I looked at their battle reports in the White Dwarf, they had terrain. There was a cool looking Garden of Moor and some city terrain. And you'd look at that and be like, oh man, they're gonna have a hard time playing that. And yet that's what they would show off. And yet that's not what people
Those are
want to do.
really cool. Those are really cool.
Yeah, and then it looked cool with those regiments. And they taught you how, they had their terrain making book that they taught you how to take like a welcome mat and like have that be your grass field. And then literally how to cut it into the movement tray and into the movement tray sizes, so that when a tray wanted to go in, you could remove a spot and have it move into it, and when it moved to the next one, you'd swap it around so they could move through a wheat field. That's what the game needed. You needed to make your terrain so that you could move through a wheat field. And so and whereas now it's just like whatever, just throw your train all over there and then move your models through it, like literally drop your guys on top of it. Who cares?
Just because that's how GW did it doesn't mean that everyone else did it the same way. Some people worked on thematic terrain that you could just actually move your models over, they painted mats, they did a lot of different things. You can't just say GW did it so everyone else did it. Because if we look towards your old World War series, you didn't really do that either, did you?
But if I had to put it down and say that you can only make 2 points, what are the 2 reasons you think that Warhammer Fantasy was canceled? I had to say the rules, which encapsulates movement trays, complexity, square bases, and the second one would be, oh no, you know what? We didn't even mention the one that I think is the biggest reason.
Which is?
The generic nature of their lore, and the fact that as much
no way, you got to dig a little deeper, sir.
I know some people are really mad at me right now because they're like, no, if you read all the books, you know how much lore there is, and I get that. You can take any generic looking fantasy, and if you just write enough books, you've made your own universe and how it's different. But to an outsider looking in, they just see regular dwarves that match the Tolkien dwarves, and regular elves that match Tolkien elves, and regular orcs and goblins.
Well, for me, I played fantasy before I read Lord of the Rings, so they copied fantasy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because that's how it worked. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what anybody, what you. If you're into the lore, you are an exception. Most people don't get into it, so they look up and they see we're literally in Middle Earth. Or just in England, because it was even modeled. The whole old world was modeled after Europe.
Dark Elf split, the Goblin Dwarf Wars, the Bretonnian Empire relationship, the Elf Bretonnian relationship, the High Elf Empire relationship, the Border Prince. Stop! It was so good.
Yes, but in the end, the Bretonnians were Grail. They were just a bunch of Grail Knights from the Dark Ages.
That's fair.
And everything looked like stuff from England.
Well, okay, but
and then you had the only thing that was really unique was
you
chaos.
Remember,
even those just look like
product
demons
of the
from
time.
Typical.
Because even everything Warhammer 40K is a joke or a reference to something else.
Right.
Like everything, the Two Missing Legions, everything is a joke or a reference to something else. They've just expanded upon it.
Right.
So I'm not going to let you judge their lore when they didn't have a chance to get expanded upon.
Steve, my man, I was getting worried you weren't going to jump into this and actually defend the franchise, because the lore for Warhammer Fantasy from an outsider's perspective can look very generic, but there's a lot of love stories, there's a lot of fleshed out stuff, there's so much background. The same can be said for 40k. You look at it, a lot of people will think StarCraft, a lot of people will think Starship Troopers, and so many other franchises that I honestly just can't remember about. So you can't just say one thing's generic without looking at the other thing and going, oh yeah, generic. Bit of the pot calling the kettle black there, isn't it? And even then, Age of Sigmar still has its generic fantasy tropes. Everything that is a fantasy or sci-fi universe is going to have generic tropes. GW have never been and will never be the most original company in the world.
And yes.
Or nobody cared enough to expand upon it.
They agree with me. Do you know how I know Games Workshop agrees with me?
You talked to him and you asked?
No.
Oh.
Because dwarves are Duradin.
Yes. Well, no.
And
Okay,
elves
I think
are elves.
No. That one I think we can comfortably say that's a trademark thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, okay.
It went from generic lore to something more trademarkable.
Something they can copyright.
Think you notice how they haven't come out with more elves? They've come out with Idoneth Deepkin.
Well, but
Have they come out with elves?
Daughters of Cain, the snake elves.
Yeah, they're snake elves. They're not elves. They're snake elves. Have they come out with just dwarves? Nope.
Yeah, Garrett are overlords. They're just dwarves.
No, they're different than your typical Tolkien dwarves. Tolkien dwarves were
Oh, they're sky dwarves. They're underground dwarves.
exactly. And that might be a little closer, but still, it's a significant difference.
Yeah.
Fire Slayers. It's
Which is
different.
cool. This is them expanding upon their lore, like the
Right. There's a reason that they had, the very first faction that came out was Stormcast Eternals.
The Snake Elves aren't really original, it's something that is in mythology. The Duradin are pretty much just steampunk dwarves. Steampunk isn't really an original idea, is it? The Stormcast, it's pretty much just Space Marines, so it's actually just taking from another franchise. Even the Deepkin, in a way, if you just take away the flying fish, they just kind of look like the Falmer from Skyrim, so it's not like they are too original either. Though I must admit that the flying shark things look freaking cool. They remind me of the Harlequins a little bit, because let's face it, like the models are very similar, but they do look really cool.
we back then you knew rumors, you knew what things were going on long before. So well before we knew about the end times, we knew about these new models that we all assumed was for the Empire. These
That looks like Space Marines.
well, no, that they never said that. They were heavily armored priests.
Right.
Sigmar's priests. Oh, not Sigmar. Carl Franz, who became Sigmar. But like, we heard about those models long before we knew about End Times. Okay, End Times comes out, wraps up all the storylines, kills everybody off. New kits come out that are all AOS scale, everything's a little bigger. New kits come out, and looking back in hindsight, we kind of knew they were going to do it while they were working on End Times, giving it their last hurrah, and the models were ready for the next game. But what else is, I don't know how important this is, but if you go back and look in the supplements that came out well before End Times, you see the AOS terrain they're in pictures in the background of these books. Not the models, just the terrain and the backgrounds for the making the nice setups, whatever. They had this AOS terrain years before AOS came out. So how long of a play was it?
Probably a long one. A company at Games Workshop size does not make those kind of changes that quickly.
Right.
Or rashly. Like the typical, like
Because-
for larger releases, those releases are worked on for 3 to 4 years. they've been discussed for that long. All the work is usually in the past year or two before it goes out, but there's decisions made 3 to 4 years in advance.
So
when somebody made a decision to cancel Fantasy and make Age of Sigmar or reboot, whatever you want to call it,
takes time, obviously.
they probably made that. My guess is at least 4 years before it
So,
actually happened.
Okay, now, so if anyone wants, I don't have the books with me. If you want to send me an email, I'll actually send you pictures of the train in the background from the books we have upstairs. Now,
Of course they're going to start showing some new models and new terrain. A business would be a bit stupid not to hint at new stuff, especially if a radical change is coming. This decision would have been done years ago as explained by them, and they had to start hinting at it, just kind of show what was to come.
sales were on the increase during end times. If they had taken all the work, yeah.
I don't remember.
If you take all the work they put in the end times and you used it to reboot and refresh Fantasy, like they kind of did, because that's kind of what I suspect also added to the bad taste. Look at all this amazing stuff you're getting. By the way, now it's over.
Yeah, and all those
Like,
things
it
you
would've
just bought are no longer valid rules.
Now, which is in hindsight, I'm glad they gave Fantasy their last hurrah. It was thank you Games Workshop for doing that. Like if you just ended it, it would have been probably worse for me. But like I see the conclusion of their story now. I'm happy, but I suspect you could have kept it going with the work because Fantasy didn't seem to get the work and the lore and the supplements that 40K did.
Right.
But that's my perception. Maybe I'm wrong.
In a realistic sense, I kind of understand why they did the whole end times thing, give it a nice hurrah, and then move on to Age of Sigmar. I don't think they actually expected for the end times to sell so much, which is actually a very big problem for Games Workshop. They don't realize that updates actually sell, because the Skaven book I think was 7th edition, the Beastmen book was 7th, the Bretonnia book was still 6th. You know, a lot of these things weren't getting updates, a lot of new models weren't being released. So when we actually got a bunch of new models and new releases, everyone kind of just jumped onto it and started buying. It's bad business there on Games Workshop's side. They should have actually realized, hey, if we release something, people will buy it. But hey, that's what they do, and we have to kind of live with their decision, don't we?
Well, then we have an interesting thing that happened after Fantasy was rebooted to Age of Sigmar, and that is Total War Warhammer.
Yeah.
And that's done very well for the Total War series. It's actually a very popular one. It's not just, there's been a lot of Warhammer games that have come out, and some have done poorly and some have done well.
Yep.
I'd put Total War Warhammer as one of their top ones in how well it's done. But that's all Warhammer Fantasy. The lore,
all the whole world,
visuals. Now it works perfectly for Total War because Total War is regimental warfare.
Yeah.
But you don't have to worry. You can have terrain in that one because the computer takes care of all the annoying movement. You just click a guy and tell him where to go, and it's like it'll reform over a hill and through brush and through a thick forest and stuff. And so it's like Warhammer Fantasy is the way it was meant to be played, but you couldn't because moving them on a movement tray basically restricted you from doing a lot of the cool stuff that could be shown.
The Total War Warhammer franchise is awesome, I love it, but you can't compare that to the tabletop, because if we're going to do that, then we might as well compare the Warhammer 40k Space Marine game to 40k. You can literally be a one-man army as one Space Marine and take out whole armies by yourself. Like, no offense, but it seems a bit of a stupid comparison.
And I also like to hear from, obviously, the people that do exist, that saw the title of this video and are jumped on and probably already left lots of nasty comments.
I'm with you, Fantasy guys. I love it too, but AOS is fun too.
What annoyed you the most about that reboot? Was it just that they basically abandoned all the money you spent and time that you spent? Or do you actually have a deeper love for the game that you can honestly say is because of the game and the lore? And not just because you're ticked off that your models are no longer really valid and that you got to rebase everything.
I have a theory on that one. I suspect when Age of Sigmar came out, if it was just a new box set and the rules came out just for the Sigmarites and the Khorne guys right away, and they didn't have all the fantasy rules in it, all the fantasy models, people would have been less upset. It was like, oh, you killed my game for this new game. It was just a new game, and then a couple months later, it said, "Oh, if you want to use your old fantasy models, here's some rules for them too, if you wanted to."
Right.
I think it was that initial moment of, "Oh, you just killed everything,"
Right.
where it didn't have to be that way.
If I can be honest, I took a break after the end times because, yeah, Age of Sigmar left a pretty bad taste in my mouth. And then I came back to it to 1st edition Age of Sigmar, which, yeah, let's face it, it was a bad edition. There was a lot of weird stuff with the no points and rules not making sense, and yeah, I just didn't want anything to do with it. So I went back to Warhammer Fantasy Battle. I enjoy it more. I've tried 2nd edition Age of Sigmar, It's not my thing. It's cool. It's an interesting game for a skirmish-based game, but I like regimental armies. I make a little joke about Age of Sigmar every now and then, but yeah, I think that 2nd edition is quite good. It's not my type of thing though. And as long as the community down here keeps playing Warhammer Fantasy, I'm happy, and I can just keep playing games. Eventually I might try a bit more of Age of Sigmar, but to be honest I've not found an army that really interests me. Other than the Deepkin, of course. They look freaking cool. Like, I might give them a shot in the future.
But
They
that's
have,
the theory.
If we really look at it honestly, for the most part, they did kind of destroy most of the old armies. Sure, you can still play Bretonnians.
Well, they literally
Sure, you can still play with your free people, and they're fun to play with.
they kill a lot of people 9 times.
Yeah, but I mean, like, you can play with your Tomb Kings and with your High Elves and with your Dark Elves, but in the end, they're not going to stand up to the Deepkin and the Gloomspike Gits and the Stormcast Eternals and the Blades of Khorne and the Heat Knights of Slumber.
Right.
That's fine, but they don't have to actually play Age of Sigmar if they don't want to. If they've still got their old armies, they can continue to play 8th or 6th or whatever edition they preferred. And we have many fan-made versions of 9th edition that people play worldwide, and there's tournaments worldwide, such as the Warhammer Armies project has just moved to a 9th. We've got unofficial 9th, the 9th Age, you know? So it's not like there aren't options.
So the fantasy players who are watching this video right now that don't play AOS are here just to complain, because we always get that. I think you're doing yourself a disservice by comparing the two or focusing on the hurt emotions of the time. It's a separate thing. It's a different thing. It's the same thing.
I would be mad if I
Well,
personally,
enough time has passed. Like
Yeah.
look, judge this game for itself now.
yeah.
It's a very different thing.
Yeah,
than when we
move
first
beyond what you. I
It's
understand what-
time to move
I
on.
know why people got upset.
Yes.
Regardless of whether it was a good position or a good move for the business of Games Workshop, it doesn't mean that every consumer benefited from it.
I don't think anybody can argue it wasn't a good move for them.
No, it was obviously it sells way better than Fantasy did, and we have documentable proof about that.
Is it not also a bit of a disservice to just do a 30-minute video and just complain about everything that was wrong with Fantasy? There were a lot of good stuff too. Should I just do a 2-hour video and complain about Age of Sigmar? Or a 2-hour video and complain about 40k? I mean, I'm doing this video as a rebuttal and it's already getting to the 40-minute mark or something like that. And to be honest, it's because I need to voice my opinion too. All you're doing is basically shitting on a franchise that, let's face it, made you a lot of money. If we look at the views that your Old World Wars have to maybe your newer battle reports, some of those videos are actually just so far above the current viewer count that you're actually getting. And I'm not trying to be mean here, but you've literally spent 30 minutes shitting down on a beloved franchise that, yes, might not be here anymore, while this is supposed to be a fixing Age of Sigmar series. I'm not sure how 30 minutes of complaining is going to fix Age of Sigmar.
But the fact of the matter is, if I am an individual and I spent $2,000 and several hundred hours of my time, and then that army is now no longer in the game, I would be upset. I don't care how good the new game is. I don't care how bad the old
that's
game
kind of
was.
the point I was trying to make. That army is still in the game. That's the different game. It's a different game.
But it's not, because Tomb Kings haven't gotten a rules update for 4 years. They're not competitive. If you play...
Okay, yeah, if you're Tomb Kings or Bretonnians, okay.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other ones like that too. But they're just not really fun to play anymore, because unless you're playing against other low-tier armies, you're always going to lose and you're not going to have fun. So...
Well, I'm assuming people will just not play Age of Sigmar with the Tomb Kings and probably still use them for Fantasy if there's still a community there. Or just for 9th Age or one of the other supplements that have come out by fans. But if you look at it in the sense of 40k, sometimes a new edition comes out and completely destroys another race. I don't mean just removing them, but getting rid of good models, or just making them basically unplayable. As I've stated before, this is something that Games Workshop have done many times, so it's not going to stop and it's going to continue. Just wait, whoever's a fan of the Deepkin or something like that, maybe in the future they just squat that army because it's just not selling or whatever. I'm not saying they will, and I hope they keep it because it looks cool, but you never know. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. I'm hoping that I didn't talk too much and annoy too many people. It's just like, I saw that video and it kind of got me angry. And you know, these are the type of things that you can put on a platform. It's kind of like an open discussion type of thing. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below if you agree or disagree with me. But honestly, I was just voicing my thoughts because honestly, it just felt like it was 30 minutes of bitching about Fantasy when the series is literally called Fixing Age of Sigmar. So I just thought, well, I might as well jump in. But with that, my friends, we've come to the end of our video. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy the video, might I suggest giving the video a like, or even subscribing to the channel, as it really does help us out. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Your support lately has been insane. We've seen great growth on the channel recently, so it's absolutely insane. I can't believe so many of you tune in to watch my videos sometimes. It's super weird, and I can't thank you guys enough. So thank you once again, and have a great day.